times as many council homes begun than the last four. But you're right, it's got to be part of a package of solutions to fix the housing crisis in London. So I'm calling on the government to give us more support, more funding, to allow us to assemble land and to allow us to build more homes that Londoners so desperately need.
In terms of fighting against what's going on with Right to Buy, in terms of the number of houses being taken out of the system versus the number of houses being put in, are you fighting a losing battle?
Well, you're right to remind me and remind your viewers that since the Right to Buy scheme began, which is an important scheme to allow those who rent homes to be able to fulfil their dreams of owning a home, we sold off in London alone more than 300,000 homes under Right to Buy, 300,000. We've only built 60,000 during that period. So for every 5 homes sold off, only one's been built in its place. And if you add into that the fact that homes that have been built in London have tended to be luxury developments, penthouse flats that sit empty, it's one of the reasons why we have this housing crisis in London. Bus drivers, nurses, cleaners simply can't afford to live in this great city, and we need them to live in the city to help our city run.
And of course, selling off those homes under Right to Buy costs the public purse. One stat across England over the last 6 years, more than £3.5 billion of public money has been spent helping 60,000 tenants buy their council home. Obviously, we hear what you're saying about the aspirations of people to own homes, but is it time now to scrap that system?
Well, if it's the case that the government's going to continue with Right to Buy, they've got to make sure you replace them with like-for-like replacements. It's really important that we meet the needs and aspirations of many people to be homeowners, but we can't do it at the expense of others in our society. So my message to the government is, if you're going to proceed with Right to Buy, it's really important there are like-for-like replacements. It's really important councils get to keep the receipts and spend it to build new homes that we so desperately need.
Sorry to interrupt,
now,
there just aren't
more than half of
like-for-like.
Londoners are...
There just aren't like-for-like replacements, are there? So in that context, then, would you say that the government should scrap or at least suspend buy-to-let? Right to Buy.
No, as long as we can continue with the sort of announcement I'm making today to build council homes, 11,000 being announced today, we'll be able to meet both objectives of fulfilling people's aspiration to be homeowners, but also making sure we have affordable council housing. The phrase affordable housing is now treated with contempt by many Londoners because the homes that have been built in the past haven't been affordable and certainly haven't been the council homes that have been sold off.
And in terms of definitions, actually, of what constitutes affordable housing, when it comes to rent, it's 80% of the market rate. Is that really affordable?
No, it's not. I've ditched that definition because it was linked with the market value of properties that were being rented or advertised for rent rather than what people are earning. So my definition as the Mayor of London of what is an affordable home is one of 3 things. Either a council home, and we've announced today more than 11,000 new council homes being started to be built in the next 4 years, or a home where you pay a London living rent, and that's a third of average earnings. So it's linked with earnings in an area, a third of average earnings in an area, or 3, it's a home that is shared ownership, part buy, part rent. So we've ditched 80%, council home, 1/3 of average earnings, or shared ownership, part buy, part rent. Really important to recognise that what we need in London are affordable homes rather than sort of penthouses left empty.
One of the issues in London in particular, I mean, it's an issue in many cities, of course, but is homelessness because of there simply not being enough accommodation. In London, 54,000 households are in temporary accommodation, and the number of rough sleepers has doubled over a year. How do those issues even get touched when you're talking about the sort of statistics that you're talking about on affordable housing and council homes just not being built quickly enough?
Well, firstly, I'd say it is possible to solve the issue of rough sleeping. It's not true to say we can't solve this issue. In the 8 years before I became mayor, rough sleeping in London doubled from about 4,000 to 8,000. In my first year as mayor, we managed to stop the increase continuing. We've plateaued it. In my second year, we've managed to reduce it by 7-8%. I'm no way saying we've solved it. But the point I'm making is, with the right investment and support before somebody becomes a rough sleeper, working with councils and charities and community groups, working with outreach workers to go out and speak to rough sleepers, it's possible to grapple with these issues. The one thing we've got to do is build more genuinely affordable homes, but secondly, make sure somebody, particularly who is a young man or young woman, doesn't end up on the streets in the first place. One of the reasons when you speak to rough sleepers why they're on the streets is because of benefit changes, and that includes universal credit, but also many young people who are sleeping rough have complex mental health issues, they may have addiction issues, and that's why it's really important that we address this. I mean, there's no point waiting for somebody to become a rough sleeper. That's difficult enough as it is to get them off the streets. Stop somebody becoming a rough sleeper in the first place is part of the solution.
Knife crime in London, 15,000 knife crimes in London over the past year alone. You've specifically linked the increase in crime to the reduction in police numbers. What exactly do you want in terms of funding for the police and number of extra police on the streets?
Well, I'm meeting the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, today in advance of his budget that's coming up next week. And one of the points I'll be making to the Chancellor is even the Home Office's own officials, the civil servants, the experts, accept now there is a link between a cut in police resources, police officers, and an increase in violent crime. I'm not excusing criminality. There are complex reasons why young people all across the country think it's okay to pick up a knife, but everyone now accepts, except politicians in the government, that there is a link between a cut in police officer numbers and the increase in violent crime. So a message to the Chancellor will be, firstly, stop any further cuts to police forces around the country. Secondly, invest not just in the police, but invest in youth and preventative services. We've got to make sure we aren't just tough on crime, the enforcement side of things. We've got to make sure we're tough on the causes of crime, invested in young people, invested in youth services, invested in wraparound care in schools, invested in mental health services, and that way we'll grapple and solve the issue of the increase in violent crime across our country.
So you won't be asking for more money for the police budget, more officers on the streets?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what I'll be doing, for more money for police officers.
But you said the message will be about... Sorry, you said... Yes, but stopping any further cuts to the police budgets and investing in youth services won't deliver extra police on the streets, will they?
I beg your pardon. So there's two things. One is to stop any further cuts. Secondly is to make sure we get the investment that we need in London and across the country. In London now, we have for the first time since 2003 fewer than 30,000 police officers. But when you compare London's population versus the police officers we have, it's the lowest we have in more than 20 years. 20 years ago, we had 4 police officers for every 1,000 population.
So how many police officers, how many more police officers, sorry to keep pushing you on this, but how many more police officers do you think are required on the streets of London?
I'd like to see in London a population of police officer numbers being, roughly speaking, 32,000. It's currently below 30,000. I'm afraid because of the pension changes the government's announced, we may lose another 1,000 police officers. The graph is going downwards. I'm doing what I can using council taxpayers' money from London, using business rates from London to stop the drop being so extreme. But unless the government invests in our police, we're going to carry on seeing across the country police officer numbers going down, notwithstanding many of us increasing council tax to try and make sure the dip isn't as stark.
So that's an extra 2,000 officers you want to see on the streets of London. If that doesn't happen, what's the effect?
Well, look, listen, I mean, we're going to carry on doing what we can. What I'm not going to do is just wait for the government to step in. So we're already doing things like, I've announced £45 million, which is now being spent for youth services in London, the Young Londoners Fund, really important. We're already using business rates and council tax to stop the decrease being as stark as it has been. But I'm afraid the predictions from the experts, not just from me as the Mayor of London, the prediction from the experts is unless we get more investment in policing, more investment in youth services, we're going to carry on seeing the increase in violent crime we've seen over the last 4 years.
Brexit. You were out with the marchers at the weekend in London. You want there to be a second referendum. Your party has said it's an option for the Labour Party amongst all the options that would be considered depending on how events roll out. Would you like Labour to get squarely behind calling for a second referendum?
Well, I'd like Labour to be the next government So obviously the first option, the best option, is a general election. If that can't happen, then clearly I'm in favour of a public vote. Look, 2 years ago, no one was saying we'd have a bad Brexit deal, or even worse, no deal at all. 2 years ago, we were being told it's possible to leave the EU and have access to the single market. We were being told that doing a deal with the EU would be the easiest trade deal in history. Lo and behold, 2.5 years on, we're seeing the NHS being advised to stock up on medicine. We're seeing the police preparing for the possibility of civil unrest. We're seeing a motorway being used as a car park when it comes to restrictions there could be in relation to vehicles going to France and vehicles from France coming here. I'm seeing every week businesses thinking about what they're going to do if we have a no deal, and that includes jobs leaving London and going not just to Europe but around the world as well. In those circumstances, I think for the first time, the British public should have a say on the outcome of the negotiations.
Just very quickly, Nicola Sturgeon's been
with the option of staying in the EU.
Nicola Sturgeon for the SNP has been really specific about what she wants to see with a second referendum. She'd like there to be a double lock so that every nation, all of the 4 nations, would have to support leave in order for it to happen. Do you think that's a good idea? And the other thing that she said is that if there's a special deal for Northern Ireland, there should be one for Scotland. Should there also be one for London?
Oh, look, London, our population in London is more than the populations of Scotland and Wales combined. We contribute a huge amount to our country's economy. I'm a firm believer in the nation state. What I'm not asking for is a unilateral declaration of independence. I quite like London being the capital city of our country, but what the government's got to realise is if our country is to prosper and do well, London needs to prosper and do well as well. And my real worry, and this is from speaking to not just business leaders and investors and innovators, but also the NHS, social care and policing, is if we have a bad Brexit deal or no deal whatsoever, it's going to be catastrophic for our capital city and for our country. In those circumstances, I think the government needs to realise that it's in our country's interests for any deal that the government does with the EU, does right by London. And I think Nicola Sturgeon, Carwyn Jones, the Northern Irish leadership, but also those across our country, and are crying out for proper leadership from our Prime Minister. The Prime Minister should be negotiating in the national interest rather than in the interest of the Conservative Party.
Sadiq Khan, thank you very much.